because soldiers in Vietnam were getting outgunned by the AKs. The M14 was just too heavy, and it kicked too hard in full auto, and what came next was a chaotic free-for-all where 7 different firearm designs fought to become America's next infantry rifle, starting with the Winchester 224. Winchester took the beloved M1 carbine design and modernized it with a smaller caliber cartridge. It weighed approximately 6.7 pounds unloaded, and Winchester's philosophy was that the reliability must not be sacrificed to obtain low weight. So the rifle used a short-stroke gas piston system that Army ordnance officers already trusted. Winchester also built the rifle with steel and wood to maintain that traditional military rifle look and feel, and they skipped the pistol grip entirely because the Army wanted soldiers to still do bayonet fighting the old-fashioned way. But here's where Winchester made their fatal mistake. They chambered it in 224 Winchester E2, a proprietary cartridge that was basically the same as the 223 Remington but just different enough to cause logistical nightmares. The Army would have to manufacture a whole new type of ammunition just for this rifle when the competing Remington design used standard components. When Fort Benning tested 15 Winchester LMRs against 15 Armalite AR-15s in 1958, the results crushed Winchester's hopes. The lightweight receiver that testers loved for its weight became a liability under sustained fire. The rifle malfunctioned more frequently than the AR-15, which somehow had a failure rate 3 times lower than even the M14. The conventional stock design caused more muzzle climb than the AR-15's straight-line design, which meant Winchester's rifle couldn't deliver effective automatic fire despite using a small cartridge. As far as ergonomic goes, the AR-15 was the final nail in the coffin. Winchester realized the Army wasn't just looking for a lighter M1 carbine. They wanted something completely different. Winchester ceased development shortly after the trials without even trying to fix the problems. So when did AR-15 really come to the scene? Armalite AR-15. Back then, Eugene Stoner designed a rifle that the Ordnance Corps absolutely hated, and the rifle would have died as a forgotten prototype if General Curtis LeMay hadn't picked one up at a 4th of July party in 1960. LeMay then immediately ordered about 8,000 rifles for Air Force Security Police to replace their M2 carbines. This forced the Army to pay attention because a sister service was adopting a rifle they had rejected. However, Dr. Frederick Carten from the Ordnance Corps refused to retest the AR-15 and claimed the M14 was superior. But when they were forced to test it anyway, his team allegedly rigged the trials to make the AR-15 fail. They criticized the rifle's rifling twist rate during Arctic testing where cold, dense air supposedly caused bullet instability. They demanded a tighter twist that actually made the rifle less lethal by preventing the bullet from tumbling in tissue. The most suspicious test was the rain simulation. The AR-15 mysteriously suffered bore obstructions and failures during heavy rainfall tests that the M14 never had to endure with the same intensity. Subsequent investigations suggested Ordnance manipulated the test parameters to favor their beloved M14. But everything changed in 1962 when the Combat Development's Experimentation Center tested the AR in actual Vietnam combat. A squad equipped with AR-15s achieved significantly more kills per engagement than M14 squads because soldiers could control the automatic fire and put more rounds on target. McNamara read this report and immediately halted M14 production, calling it functionally obsolete. The AR-15's unit cost was $150 back in the 1960s for M16A1 variant, but the Army had already spent millions on M14 tooling and production that resulted in a rifle nobody wanted. Armalite AR-18. After selling the AR-15 design to Colt, Armalite needed a new product to stay in business. They developed the 18 version as a low-cost alternative for nations that couldn't afford the precision machining required for AR-15 production. The rifle used stamped steel construction similar to the AKM or MP40, which made it significantly cheaper to manufacture. The AR-18 featured a short-stroke gas piston system instead of the AR-15's direct impingement design. This made the rifle more tolerant of dirt and reduced maintenance requirements because fouling didn't blow back into the action. The piston system was mechanically simpler to understand for armorers familiar with traditional firearms. So the Army evaluated the AR-18 in 1964, but found it offered no significant performance advantage over the M16. The stamped steel construction was viewed as less durable than the AR-15's forged aluminum receivers, even though stamped steel had proven reliable in the AK platform. American procurement officers had a bias against stamped construction that dated back to the failures of early submachine guns. The timing of the evaluation worked against Armalite. By 1964, the Army had already committed to the M16 platform despite ongoing reliability issues. Switching to the AR-18 would have required new training materials and new spare parts logistics. While the US military rejected it, the 18's short-stroke gas piston system became the mechanical basis for some of the world's most successful modern rifles like the HKG-36. Armalite's innovation influenced military small arms development globally, even though American soldiers never carried it into battle. While the AR-15 worked well, but the Army didn't actually want the AR to be permanent. They viewed it as a stopgap until the real future rifle arrived. And that rifle was the Special Purpose Individual Weapon, also known as the SPIW. This rifle is designed to fire high-velocity flechettes at 4,300 feet per second and included an integrated 40mm grenade launcher. The operational requirements demanded a weapon that weighed a maximum 10 pounds, loaded with 60 rounds of flechette ammo and 3 grenades. Springfield's engineers faced an impossible challenge because physics doesn't care about requirements documents. To fit 60 flechette rounds into a compact bullpup frame, Springfield designed a massive suitcase magazine system. The magazine held two 30-round stacks where the weapon fed from the front stack first, then automatically switched to the rear stack. This mechanism was heavy, complex, and jammed constantly during testing. The prototype weighed about 14 pounds, which was 4 pounds over the requirement limit. The balance was terrible because all that weight sat in the rear of the bullpup configuration, making the rifle feel like carrying a sledgehammer backwards. As far as reliability goes, the feed system's complexity made it completely unsuitable for field conditions where soldiers needed weapons that worked even when covered in mud. Springfield's cyclic rate was 1,700 rounds per minute in burst mode, which sounds impressive until you realize the flechettes needed to leave the barrel before the shooter felt recoil. The timing was off, which degraded accuracy and defeated the entire purpose of the salvo firing concept that Project Salvo had developed. Long story short, the SPIW wasn't practical and it was a failure, but an interesting concept. During this time, Winchester was also developing a SPIW. But Winchester took a different approach by designing a soft recoil system where the barrel and action receded into the stock. This dampened the recoil force from the high-velocity flechette rounds, which theoretically improved accuracy during burst fire. When it comes to the grenade launcher, they developed a semi-automatic, blow-forward 40mm launcher that could fire multiple grenades quickly without manual reloading between shots. This solved one of the operational requirements better than Springfield's design. But Winchester also made one critical error that killed their chances. The rifle fired at 700 rounds per minute, which the Army deemed too slow for effective salvo fire. And the entire point of flechettes was to fire multiple projectiles so fast that they left the barrel as a tight group before recoil moved the weapon. At 700 revolutions per minute, the shooter felt recoil between shots, which spread the pattern too wide and destroyed hit probability. And also the magazine had feeding problems and the rifle's balance was off. They couldn't fix the cyclic rate problem without completely redesigning the action, and they couldn't redesign the action without starting over from scratch. AAI Corporation XM19SFR. Aircraft Armaments Corporation created a rifle using a piston primer system that achieved a blistering 2,400 rounds per minute in burst mode. This extreme cyclic rate meant 3 flechettes exited the barrel before the shooter felt any recoil, which was exactly what the salvo theory demanded. The hit probability calculations looked perfect on paper. A tight pattern of 3 high-velocity flechettes traveling at 4,000 feet per second would statistically guarantee hits at 300 yards, even when soldiers couldn't aim perfectly under combat stress. This was the Operations Research Office's dream weapon brought to life. But the problems were that the 2,400 RPM rate generated so much heat that the chamber temperature spiked high enough to cause cook-offs. Rounds would detonate spontaneously from heat before the shooter pulled the trigger, which is obviously unacceptable for a combat weapon. And if the rifle needed a cooling system, that meant added weight, which violated the requirements. Another problem is that each flechette sat in a plastic carrier that separated from the dart after leaving the barrel. This plastic sabot disintegrated into a cloud of fiberglass dust and created a massive muzzle flash that blinded shooters in low-light conditions. The AAI rifle's cost projections revealed the final problem. The tungsten and steel flechettes with plastic sabots cost 5 to 10 times more than standard 5.56 ammunition. The Army would have to spend millions just to stockpile enough ammunition for training, let alone actual combat operations. Stoner 63 System. Eugene Stoner left Armalite after selling the AR-15 design to Colt and immediately started working on something even more ambitious. The Stoner 63 was a modular weapon system where a single receiver could transform into a rifle, carbine, belt-fed light machine gun, or vehicle-mounted weapon by swapping components. Navy SEALs adopted the Stoner 63A in the Commando LMG configuration designated Mark 23 Mod 0. They loved it because it provided belt-fed firepower in a package significantly lighter than the M60 machine gun and with more ammo. Navy SEAL actively developed squad tactics specifically around the Stoner 63's capabilities. The weapon's modularity meant armorers could customize configurations for different mission profiles, and the teams appreciated having that flexibility in the field. But the rifle was maintenance-intensive, which became obvious during extended operations. The modularity came at the cost of complexity. Every configuration required different small parts, springs, and feed mechanisms. Keeping track of all these components in a jungle environment proved difficult. The Army tested the Stoner 63 in 1971 for potential adoption, but rejected it after sand testing. The complex feed mechanism jammed when exposed to gritty environments because the modularity required more moving parts and tighter tolerances than a dedicated single-purpose weapon. You can't have modularity and simplicity at the same time. Logistics killed any remaining chance of adoption. The M16 was already in the supply chain, training manuals existed, armorers understood the platform, and spare parts were widely available. Adding a second 5.56 system would require duplicate infrastructure without providing enough advantage to justify the cost. The Stoner 63 remained a special operations weapon that never achieved mainstream military adoption despite its innovative design. Harrington and Richardson T223. This rifle represents one of the strangest footnotes in procurement history. Harrington and Richardson licensed the German HK-33 to compete for U.S. military contracts. The HK-33 was essentially a 5.56 version of the proven G3 battle rifle that used a roller-delayed blowback system. So H&R modified the German design to include a bolt hold open on the last shot, and American soldiers were trained to reload quickly using the bolt hold open as a visual indicator that the magazine was empty. German rifles didn't include this feature because their doctrine emphasized continuous magazine changes before running dry. As far as cost goes, it was uncompetitive for large-scale procurement where the Army needed to equip hundreds of thousands of infantry soldiers. Basically, there was no compelling reason to adopt the T223 when the M16 could do the same job. H&R's bankruptcy following their involvement in the M14 production scandals ended any hope of the rifle from ever gaining traction. The company lacked the financial resources to continue development or compete on price with established manufacturers like Colt. If you enjoyed this content, you may like this one too.